And I know we don't want to talk about popular things, but you were born in Cleveland, Ohio, and you must have a sense of the Cleveland Indians.
A great sense of the Cleveland Indians, soon to be the Cleveland Guardians. Yeah.
Now, what was your sense growing up? This would have been the Bob Feller era. This would have been, 48, 54, some seminal time periods as an Indians fan.
Well, my sense growing up was that if you loved the Indians, you had to hate the Yankees. And even as a young boy, I had no problem with the Cleveland Indians, but I didn't like Chief Wahoo. Mm-hmm. And not because I was smart enough to know it was offensive to Native Americans. I didn't like Chief Wahoo because I thought it was a caricature. I mean, if I were an Indian, I wouldn't like that wide grin, So I am not at all unhappy that the Indians are now the Guardians.
So it didn't shock you, or now that we realize that's been a kind of a politically sensitive issue in the last few years, as it has been in Washington with the Redskins. Did you have a hero growing up? As in the Indians? Was you a Feller guy?
I was a Feller guy. I also liked Lou Boudreau.
Yep.
All-American baseball player and could play a number of positions and the like. I knew two things in the first grade, though. I knew I wanted to be a priest on the first day of the first grade. And the other thing I knew in the first grade is that I was in love with Joanne Mahoney, who was in my homeroom for 12 years, from the first grade all the way through high school. So it was a little story of the agony and the ecstasy, But I went into the seminary after high school, mm-hmm. and proceeded on to ordination in 1965. Thought I'd be a parish priest for the rest of my priesthood, and that didn't happen.
So you're going through high school, and you have this early sense, if not premonition, that you want to be a priest. And at the same time, what did your family think of that?
Well, they were pretty happy with it. My family was a strongly committed Catholic family. Mm-hmm. So, no, they were okay with it. In fact, back in the 1950s, for a working class family to have a son go into the seminary and possibly become a priest, that was okay. That was, really okay. It almost would raise their son to the status of an attorney or a physician, or a judge or something like that. Yeah. So no, I had no resistance from my family whatsoever.
I grew up in a very Italian neighborhood in Jamestown, New York, and clearly all the Italian mothers, that was their goal in life, my son to be a priest.
Well, I think that was true of Irish mothers too. Yeah. And you named the Catholic ethnic group, Polish, Italian, Slovenian, whatever, Irish, of course. Yeah.
So as when you make a decision, and you have to make that determination after high school to go to the seminary, did your friends have any kind of trepidation saying, Don, what are you doing?
Actually, that's a good question, because in my senior year of high school, I needed to get a letter of recommendation from the principal of the high school sent to the rector of the seminary. Mm-hmm. And when I went into her office, I said, Sister Anna Francis, I would like you to write a letter of recommendation for me to enter the seminary if you're open to doing that. And she said she was, of course. And then I said, I'm going to ask you not to tell anybody about this. I did not want any of my high school friends to know I was going into the seminary. They did not know until like a month or so before I was going into the seminary. Why I was so secretive about entering the seminary, I can't really tell you. I think I might have been afraid they would think I was pious. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want them to do that. But anyway, they were surprised. They thought I'd be going to John Carroll University in Cleveland and wind up a teacher or something like that.
You were an athlete. Was that part of your early days?
Oh, listen, Yes, I played varsity basketball at Holy Name.
Mm-hmm.
My junior year, we won a championship, but I became friends with the bench. I mean, I didn't start too many games, well, you'll smile at this, I think, Greg. My house job at St. Mary's Seminary, when I was a seminarian, not the rector, was master of games. So I was like the AD of the seminary there. I scheduled the racquetball courts and the intramural basketball and softball games and the like. And my first parish, as long as we're on sports, was St. Christopher's in Rocky River, where Herb Score and his wife were parishioners. And I got to know Herb Score pretty well.
Talk to me about Herb Score, because he was a baseball card of mine. And of course got hit by Gil McDougall. And was that during that time period where you were connected with him?
This was, yeah, after he got hit by Gil McDougall. Yeah. I'm not going to say too much about Herb. He went to Mass every Sunday. But while I was at St. Christopher's, Sister Bonaventure Murphy changed my life. I was a parish priest at St. Christopher's, teaching religion at Magnificat High School for Girls, which was in the parish. And I was teaching marriage because I knew so much about it, you know. I'm teaching there for 2 or 3 years, 1 or 2 days a week, and one day I'm walking down the hall, and Sister Bonaventure Murphy appears out of nowhere. And it was like a scene from Downton Abbey. "Father Cozzens, may I have a word with you?" Mm-hmm. I said, "Well, of course, sister." And we stepped into an empty classroom, and she closed the door, and this is almost verbatim. "I hope you won't think me impertinent, but you should go back to school." As soon as she said this, I knew she was right. I was ordained in 1965 with a pre-Vatican II seminary training for a post-Vatican II church. And this nun was pretty savvy. She said, "Now, if the rector, if the pastor of your parish sees college catalogs coming into the rectory, he might think you're leaving the priesthood. You tell me what colleges you're interested in. I will write to them and get their admissions packets." So that led to an MA at Notre Dame. And then from Notre Dame, I went to Kent State and earned a doctorate. And then I kind of moved from parish work into campus ministry and then college teaching, secretary or vicar for clergy and religious, and then 6 years as a seminary rector. And during that time, I started writing, and that changed things too.
You're just a Renaissance man. However, I got to go back to the fact that you were teaching marriage. And obviously, just the profession you chose, celibacy being a part of that. How does one do the research for that?
Well, I've been teaching courses on marriage, not only at Magnificat High School, but in college too. When it comes to the intimate part of marriage, you're better to leave that alone. You don't want to know too much about that. But the key to marriage, I think, is a healthy relationship. And priests are in the relationship business,
Sure.
So I approached teaching marriage from, how do you negotiate a friendship? How do you negotiate, an intimate relationship? And dealing with the hurts, the misunderstandings, the joys and sorrows of it all. So, I certainly wasn't teaching a course on sexual technique. God help me.
You won an award from the Voice of the Faithful. And in their description of you, that you've been a steadfast supporter of the mission and goals. And you are a priest who challenges the status quo with wit, wisdom, and unflinching honesty. Does that sound like you?
A little. I have challenged the system. Mm-hmm. I hope with wit and wisdom. Some people have told me, after I had received a fair amount of criticism for one of the books I wrote, you're not angry, you can tell that from your writing, and you love the church. We can also pick that up in what you've written. I hope that's true.
The book I assume you're referring to is Changing Face of the Priesthood. But when you finally delivered that to the publisher and they read it, did they think that would have a powerful resonance?
They did. They did. And when I decided to put the two neuralgic chapters in, the one on clergy sexual abuse and another chapter on the higher percentage of gay men in the seminary and priesthood, I knew the book would be controversial. And I told myself I had a year to prepare myself spiritually for the criticism that it would receive. Now, the publisher also knew it would be a controversial book. But the publisher at that time, he was smarting because the Vatican told him that he had to withdraw one of his published books. I think it might have been entitled Women at the Altar. It was about the ordination of women to the priesthood. So it was a Catholic publishing house, and his abbot and his bishop told him to withdraw the book. He did, out of obedience. My book comes along, and he's still smarting from that order from his superiors. So I think he told himself, come hell or high water, I'm going to publish Don Cozzens' book. He told me that story pretty much, so I think it's fairly true.
Were you prepared for the reaction? You knew it was coming, but did there are floods, and there are tsunamis, and then there's...
I knew it was coming. I didn't believe it would be as instant as it was, and the reason the backlash came almost immediately is that the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which is the major newspaper in Cleveland, as soon as the book came out, they did an essay review of the book. And so my fellow priests and seminarians and Catholics of the Diocese of Cleveland, they didn't have to read the book. All they had to do was read the review, and they knew they didn't like the book. So it started almost within weeks after the book came out. Was I surprised? No. As I said, I was aware that it would come out, but I really touched some nerves. The people that didn't like the book felt personally attacked. And things softened up a little bit in 2002 with the Boston scandal, Spotlight movie. But there were priests that would not talk to me. Many of them sent me emails that were telling me where to go, so to speak. So it was more sudden than I expected. And I don't think it was hotter than I anticipated, but the suddenness of it surprised me. At the same time, let me say that I received substantial support. And not only from Clevelanders and Cleveland priests, but from bishops and cardinals.
So now you're out there. You're an author. You've opened up the lid, and did you feel like you had to be somewhat defensive?
I hope I wasn't defensive.
Or defensive?
Or defensive? I hope I wasn't defensive. I think that's what I meant to say originally. I had people whisper in my ear, what you said is true and accurate. We all know that. But you still should not have said it or wrote it while you're a sitting rector. So that was kind of the issue. Keep your mouth shut until you're no longer a rector.
Further to this article that appeared in 2009, it says, Father Cozzens' credibility is based, among other things, on his experience as vicar for clergy in the Diocese of Cleveland. As a non-Catholic, what does that mean? as a position? You were the vicar. What is that?
And the
Kind of like general counsel? Is it?
No, not quite. The vicar is like the bishop's deputy.
Okay.
Larger dioceses would have a series of vicars. There could be a vicar for education, a vicar for parish life, a vicar for social concerns, and a vicar for clergy and religious. So I was to handle the daily administrative roles of the bishop when it came to clergy and religious. During this position, while I had this position, cases of clergy sexual abuse were surfacing.
What time period would this have been?
This would have been from about 89 to 95.
Okay.
So the abuse scandal had broken in 1985, but most Catholics wanted to say it's a few bad apples,
Yes.
that cliche, you know, and they didn't want to admit the extent of it, and they didn't want to admit the systemic issues that were at play.
Right. So at some points during listening to this, how difficult it must have been, not only the abused, but also the abuser. And at some point you have to go before congregations and tell the congregation, we have to make some changes and moves, personnel moves. Is that tough?
Oh, very much so, especially after, say, a priest was removed because of an allegation of misconduct, and you needed to break the news. I was delegated as vicar to go to the parish and say, Father so-and-so, whom you loved very much, is now gone. And so I was the bearer of bad news. And often there was a TV camera there, you know, trying to catch the reaction of the parishioners. And so there were some people that felt I was the villain.
Of course, you're looking at the parishioners. What's their reaction? They got to be
shocked, especially the people that really liked the pastor. And some of the abuser priests were very effective pastors. So, and that wasn't easy.
Yikes! What a job.
Right.
That must have, did you feel a sense of, gosh, you did it for 6 years as the vicar in that position, almost being burned out? I mean, this is a difficult emotional thing.
You know, I was living at a parish during these years in which I was vicar, St. Anne's Parish in Cleveland Heights. And as I was driving from the Chancery or the Catholic Center in downtown Cleveland out to Cleveland Heights, about a 6-mile drive, there were times during that drive back to the rectory at the end of the day thinking something's wrong, really wrong, because I was also dealing with the victims who had come forward with their parents, you know, reporting the abuse. And the emotional, spiritual pain would knot my stomach. I mean, it was just, and then dealing with the priest, to show you how unprepared we were to deal with the clergy sexual abuse scandal. In many cases, I was the advocate for the victim and the advocate for the priest accused of abusing them. Today we've separated those two conflicting areas. Yes, it was wrenching, really, and thank goodness for my family and friends. They were very supportive.
The book comes out, and this is 2000 when it was published. At the beginning of, well, you'd had a book out previously in 1997, The Spirituality of the
Diocesan Priest.
What got you into the writing business? Is this something, was that always something you were hankering to do?
Not really. I had written letters to the editor and occasional essays for a newspaper or a magazine. But in about 1995, I got a call from a Dominican priest who was editing a book on the priesthood. And he said, I need a chapter on the spirituality of the diocesan priest. And you've been recommended to me. And what he was getting at is that the Catholic tradition has some wonderful spiritualities. You think of the Jesuits, you think of the Benedictines, the Vincentians, the Dominicans. But in the Catholic Seminary for Diocesan Priests, we were kind of borrowing from these various spiritualities. And I wanted to create a spirituality for the diocesan priest. Not create so much as discover. And I argued it was really in our preaching, because the diocesan priest ordinarily is preaching every day, sometimes 2 to 3 times a day. Daily Mass, weekend liturgies, weddings, funerals, school masses. So I built a spirituality around the Word of God, and I called it Tending the Word. So that book did well. This edited book, it was called Being a Priest Today. It was published by Liturgical Press, and I got the idea that I could create a book called The Spirituality of the Diocesan Priest, and I asked 4 bishops and 7 other priests and myself to write chapters for this book. So that's how I kind of got into writing. I was in my late 50s, and as you can tell now, I'm in my late 90s.
I can't tell that. You hide this all very well. I love your enthusiasm, because sitting down and writing a book is a process. Everybody's got a little bit of a different ability to do that. I mean, you have an idea, then what? What's your normal process? You've got 6 nonfiction and.
I have 6 nonfiction and 3 novels.
Okay.
So, what's my process?
Yeah, I mean, you got to just wake up in the morning, have coffee and breakfast, and say, "Aha! This is my storyline."
My process is to begin with a title, and people who teach people how to write say, "Don't worry about the title; that will come later." I have to have a title, at least a working title, and from that title. Kind of flows different themes. And so I would draw on my experience, and I've had some good graduate education. I did my doctorate on Paul Tillich, a Lutheran theologian and philosopher and psychologist. And so my doctoral work has always been very practical for me. So drawing from the academic background and my experience, certain lights would go on. And I just started writing. And I remember Henry Nouwen, a really great spiritual writer who had written, I think, 50 or 60 books. He was asked that same question you just asked me, and he said, I don't write books. He said, I write essays. And so he said, if you think you're going to write a book, that's intimidating. But just write the first chapter and consider it an essay. Then you're going to write another essay, and then a third essay. Sure. And before you know it, you have 10 essays, 10 chapters, and 300 pages. And, I enjoyed the writing. It's a spiritual activity for me. I feel whole after a 2-hour writing session.
At some point, you're done. How do you know when you're done? The book, I've talked to a lot of authors, we've interviewed them. Some have boxes of 3x5 cards and little notes, and all of a sudden when the box is full, that's it, no more. I'm not working off anymore. If
you're writing an academic book, the temptation is never to finish it. Because you're always thinking of some colleague of yours who is going to point out a weakness to the book. So you want to cover all your bases. And so it's hard to finish the book because you're anticipating criticism. Now, I'm not writing, for the most part, for academics. I'm writing for people in the pews. But for me, something happens where you say, it's finished. It's you know, I might add an epilogue, but I don't know how I know, but you know it's finished.
Do you ever go back and if there was a second printing, sort of saying, all right, I missed something, or here's an...
I wish I could say yes. It sounds really cocky of me to say, for the most part, no, that hasn't happened. I've been pretty comfortable with what I've written.
You just given me a sheet on something called The Cardinal Assassin, a novel, Donald Cozzens. This is your third novel, but it also says it's a novel. It's fiction, which you went from non-fiction to fiction. Was there an aha moment where you said...
Actually, I don't know if there was one aha moment, but usually my best ideas come to me in the morning, right after I get up in the morning. And I think that happens with many people, so it's not just the two of us. But I was thinking, maybe one of the ways to get my idea across, or ideas about how to renew our church, I can best communicate these new ideas through fiction rather than nonfiction. And so that's how it got started.
And I know I was just reading a response to your second fiction one, which dealt with women. What was it called?
Well, it was called Under Pain of Mortal Sin. But one of the major themes is the ordination of women, and some very strange reactionary Catholics feeling that was an abomination, and took drastic steps to try to blot out this sin against the Holy Roman Catholic Church. So.
Well, it was three women that were kind of got ordained in the Danube. I mean, away from here, and came back. Cleveland.
They were ordained by retired bishops who were validly ordained bishops. So these women would acknowledge they were illicitly ordained, but they claimed to be validly ordained. So.
A distinction without a difference?
An important distinction. I think it's important to know that these women are saying our ordination is irregular, but they insist that it's valid. Now the church is saying, no, it's both irregular, illicit, and invalid.
What's been the reaction of all of your friends to this novel approach? No pun, maybe pun intended, I guess.
Well, the first novel, Master of Ceremonies, which was not about the ordination of women, but it was about a priest who abused boys and became an archbishop. The reaction to that from the critics was good. It won 2 awards. So my first novel got an award from the Catholic Press Association, first place for an adult religious novel, and then received an award from an independent organization of small publishers. The response to the novels has been really positive among my family and friends, but it hasn't generated the media attention that the nonfiction books have.
2000 was sort of certainly a media coming out moment for you. Then much happened, both in Boston and the movie, and everybody probably I've ever known watched the movie, and the journalists were critically acclaimed, continue to be acclaimed. In fact, they were here in Chautauqua recently. And do you get how do you feel about all that? I mean, here you are, the world has changed, the perception has changed since you wrote a book in 2000 till now, 2021, a lot's going on. There's certainly an acceptance of what you tried to argue at the time as a reality. How does that make you feel, I'm sure not necessarily happy, but it just, are you, that which you saw and articulated is now being articulated a lot?
I think my experience, narrow as it was, was on target for the broader Catholic Church. I'm happy that the Catholic Church has made significant strides in responding to clergy sexual abuse in a much more pastoral way. I still feel that we're reluctant to look at the structure and the systems that facilitated the abuse. What we're trying to do is to make sure that clergy today are well aware of boundary violations. So it's like remedial work, but my sadness comes from the fact that we still haven't really addressed the structural or systemic issues that are supporting this kind of misbehavior.
Thursday at the Catholic House, Mark Russell will be introducing you. Mark Russell, well known to our area and certainly one of the great satirists and just great musicians. Why would he choose to introduce you?
Well, he has his shortcomings, as we have. You know, I have to tell you that when the president of the Catholic community called to tell me that Mark Russell had volunteered to introduce me, I said, I have been hoping that he wouldn't even come to the talk, because I'd be intimidated with Mark Russell in the assembly there. But now he's going to introduce me. I felt both honored and terrified. I thought, whoa. But anyway, I know Mark will be kind to me when he introduces me. And I'll do my best, and I'm not Mark Russell. I think I'll get a few laughs, but it's a serious talk. I'm not trying to be a comedian. It's a serious talk on, well, the title is Holy Humor, Laughter in the Spiritual Life. And I think if a person doesn't have the capacity to laugh, that's not necessarily a good sign.
You were deemed a guy with a real sense of humor when you were in the priesthood? I mean, active in the priesthood? No,
absolutely not. I was kind of, I think I'm more of an introvert by nature than an extrovert. I was a fairly popular guy in the seminary, a class president and all that, but I wasn't a jokester, or I never heard people say, yeah, that Don Cozzens has a great sense of humor. I just enjoy humor, and
where's your source material for this?
Listen, Greg, if you're a clergy person today, you've got more material than you know what to do with. I'm going to start out with a story about my father.
Sure. Give me a teaser.
Nobody
will see it until after it's done.
Here's the teaser. My father, when he was a teenager, worked at Calvary Cemetery in Cleveland, a Catholic cemetery, and it was during the war years, and the cemetery people got a call from a parish saying that a funeral would be arriving, a cortege would be arriving, and they won't have a priest, so have one of the cemetery employees lead the prayers at the grave, the committal prayers. And so the foreman turned to my dad, who was a teenager. The foreman knew my dad was an altar server. Mm-hmm. And he said, his name was Bernard. He said, Bernie, go get cleaned up. You're going to lead some prayers here at the grave. And my dad said, I've never done this before. I don't know how to do this. And the foreman said, listen, you know the Our Father. You know the Hail Mary. You say, a glory be to the Father. Eternal rest grant to him, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon him. May his soul, you know that. That's all you have to do. So my dad gets washed up, standing at the head of the grave. The funeral procession arrives, they bring the casket up, the pallbearers step back, the funeral director gives my dad a little nod, and my father begins, "Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts which we are about to receive." He says the blessing before a meal in the Catholic tradition. So he tells that story on himself, so I'm sure he wouldn't, yeah.
Perfect. But, and at the expense of, again, people won't hear this until after the fact, you always want to leave them laughing. That last punchline. Have you got that set up in your mind's eye, or does it just happen in the course of a talk?
I think I know how I'm going to end the talk on Thursday. And it's a quote from Hilaire Belloc, 18th century, or is he a 19th century writer? "Wherever the Catholic sun doth shine, there's always laughter and good red wine. At least I've always found it so. Benedicamus Domino." That'll be it. So,
well, Mark will approve. This is great. Aside from celebrating 1948, the championship with the Cleveland Indians, what's the highlight of your career?
Well, I can't go beyond that. I mean, the highlight of my career, I could say it was meeting Pope John Paul II, shaking his hand and having photographers take pictures. But I think a highlight of my career might have been meeting the Episcopal Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, who just struck me. And then I've met Thomas Merton, which is unusual. There are not many people alive today who remember Merton. But I don't think of the priesthood as a career, so it's not like, the Chamber of Commerce gave me an award or something. I have earned a few awards along the way. A highlight of my career, I love celebrating Mass. Every day is a highlight of my career that I celebrate Mass. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm a pretty good pastoral counselor. So I don't think I have a highlight of my career. It's been a challenging, at times painful career, if I want to use that term, but it's been overall really joyful, and I'm very grateful to be a priest. Joanne Mahoney notwithstanding.
Never finished that story.
Well, I had 3 dates with Joanne.
Yeah.
And at our 10th high school reunion, she's married with 2 children at the time. She has 4 or 5 now. There was a slow dance. And so I was ordained 2 years. So this is 1975. And I'm dancing with Joanne Mahoney, and I said, "Joanne, I hope you realize I was in love with you from the first day of the first grade until we graduated from high school." And she had the grace to say, "Now you tell me." She was just being kind, but it was a nice thing for her to say.
Joanne Mahoney, that's great. This is not your first time to Chautauqua. What brought you here the first time?
An invitation to be the Catholic chaplain, and I had heard really good things about Chautauqua, but I think this is the 7th or 10th time I've been here, so I enjoy it. I think that the Catholic Church can learn a lot from Chautauqua. I'm talking about the ecumenical, interfaith dimension. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the emphasis on civility and people who can disagree and still be friends, and so it's a magical place.
What are you doing now? What keeps you busy now? I mean, a little more than 80 years old. And do you have a parish now?
Oh no, I'm retired from the Diocese of Cleveland, and I'm also retired from John Carroll University, where I spent the last 13 years of my active priesthood. I was writer in residence there, and I was also I taught in the theology department. But what I'm doing right now is doing the preparation work of a nonfiction book that I might commit to. So.
Amazing. Well, you're amazing. This is fantastic. Thank you for, probably I ambushed you a little bit here today by getting it on camera, but you were terrific.
Thank you for saying that. I can't stand watching myself on video, but anyway, it'll be good for my humility.
Well, thank you. Good luck. Good luck on Thursday.
Thank you.
Yeah.